Hello, I'm Bill Olson. Kyoko Mori learned to enjoy writing at a young age, thanks to her grandparents. Though she was born and raised in Japan, she's done most of her writing in English. Mori has published fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, and is a Briggs-Copeland lecturer in creative writing at Harvard University. I talked with her in the year 2000 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. You had ambitions to be a writer as a child, but you had other ambitions too. Can you talk about those?
Well, they were really more like dreams than ambitions. I thought, when you're in first, second, or third grade, people ask you, what do you want to do when you grow up? I always said that I wanted to be a writer, but there were other things that I wanted to do. I mean, I thought it would be great to be an artist, but I wasn't very serious about it. I thought, it'd be fun to work with animals. I wanted to be a veterinarian at one time. But, we're talking third grade, so I don't think I realized what kind of training you have to do to be a veterinarian. I'm not very good in science, so.
How old were you when you realized that writing is what you really wanted to do?
I don't think until you're in high school you really envision your future in any kind of a concrete way. So maybe when I was a senior in high school, when I was in college, I started thinking that, I wanted to write in some way that is more than a hobby.
I think that's when I realized it too. When I was in high school, I realized I wanted to do writing and filmmaking. And before that, there were little signs along the way, but there were signs that I might like cars too. So.
Right, exactly.
Tell me about how your mom and grandfather influenced your interest in writing.
They were both writers. Not professionally so, but my grandfather kept a journal and he wrote every day. He was also a school teacher, so writing was something that he taught. He didn't, he wasn't a published novelist or anything, but writing was a discipline with him and something that he valued very much. My mother wrote, every week she would write to her parents and write these long letters, and it was something that she valued. The person in my family who published actually was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. She used to write haiku, and the newspapers in Japan always had, like every month they would publish, I don't know, 30 haiku or whatever. And she would often get published in, that sort of a way. She would get her poems published in newspapers. It wasn't like a great writing career, but she certainly was a writer in that way.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to see yourself in print. And it must have been nice for you to see that your grandmother was published.
Definitely. So it wasn't anything unusual for me to think of writing. Some people don't really see writing practiced except at school, but I certainly saw a lot of writing being practiced at home.
Oh, I was kind of curious. Do you still have your father's or your grandfather's journal?
I do, yeah. I read them now and then. I haven't really done anything with them, but just to see the texture of life there, when he would talk about the weather, he would talk about what was on TV, the things that my cousins or my uncles or aunts had said. Yeah, it was nice. It's nice to have that.
How did your proficiency in English open doors for you, if it did?
I've always spoken English, so it's never been a real big deal. But when it turned out that I wasn't going to write in Japanese, it was very, good to have another language.
How come you decided not to do writing in Japanese?
Writing in Japanese is really hard. It's never been, I did well enough, but I don't know, it's like this. In Japan, you're never trained to be a writer. The people who become writers on their own. There isn't like a graduate program in creative writing. They don't really teach creative writing in, schools. So I think if your parents are famous writers or journalists and you have that kind of access, it's very easier to become a writer in Japanese than not. Even though people in my family wrote regularly, they were not professional writers, so I wouldn't have had the connections or the opportunity. And I really am not into this idea that people can just teach themselves. That may be true for some people. But everything I know how to do, I have had to, learn in some formal way. You know, I run, but I was on a track team in high school, so it wasn't something I even taught myself. You know, I'm a weaver. I took a class. I mean, why should writing be any different? I don't see how I would have learned to write in Japanese, though, because there are no classes.
Do you find that, since English is from a different cultural tradition, that writing about Japan or your Japanese background in English kind of misses something of the tradition or heritage of Japan?
No, not really. I mean, so much of any writing in any language is about a place that the language is not, not from. You know, people write about a lot of Americans write about Europe, for instance. And I don't think that that misses much of anything.
You would say then that a writer who wants to write about another place shouldn't worry about what language they write in as long as they're a good writer in that language.
Yeah, and also I think it probably helps to be able to speak that language that's spoken in that other place so that your experience in that place is, fairly full. Because if you go to a place where you don't speak the language, your experience in that place can only be, and it can be limited by the fact that you don't really have conversations there except with yourself. So I think it helps to know the other language, but I don't think you like if you were an American writer, wanting to write about Germany, you probably should be able to speak German, so when you go there, you can have a fairly full life. But I don't think you have to be able to write in German to write about Germany.
I agree with you, by the way, about all of that. I've spent time in Mexico, and I find, having had conversations with people in Spanish has allowed me to understand their feelings about things more, and I would be able to write about Mexicans in Mexico much better than I ever could otherwise. Because otherwise I'd be going by stereotypes and so forth. Well, you pretty much answered this, but maybe something else will come to mind on it, so I'll ask it anyway. What helped you become a good writer?
I guess going to school, and attending these workshops. They were really pretty necessary, I think. Just to have my peers and also my professors really look at my writing and just really pay attention, to the things that I've done. Every paragraph, every sentence, so on and so forth. Also, reading literature really helped. But there again, going to school really helped because there were people to direct me to, what is available, for me to read. If I just went to the bookstore when I was a senior in high school and looked at the fiction stacks, I really wouldn't have necessarily known what to read that would be really helpful to me.
Right, I understand. So how much of good writing would you say is talent from within, and how much of it is skill, like a craft that can be developed?
Well, I think it's both. Now that I teach, I realize that there is a huge gap between the talent of a person who can really write right off the bat and, the talent of people who struggle. I really don't, I used to think that anyone could learn to be a writer, but I don't think this anymore. After years of teaching, I have to say that anyone can get much, much better than, where he or she is at right now in their, in his or her writing ability. I don't think that just anyone is going to be a great writer, but anyone can get better. That's so much, that's so true.
Like anyone can learn how to write concisely and not use repetitions and so forth. But as far as the really great metaphor, some people might not have a knack for it.
Yeah, or an eye for detail. Or the sensitivity to language. I do think that there's some talent involved there, but on the other hand, I don't think somebody who has a lot of talent who never, tries or revises. I don't think someone like that could write a really great novel either.
Right. It's not, the revising is a real important part of it, and good teachers who can help guide someone and help them find the best, the greatest potential they have.
Mm-hmm.
Writers are often told, write what you know. Is it possible to do good writing while not writing what you know?
No, I don't think so. I think, however, that people should write what they know but don't understand. This is why so many people write about their family. I mean, these are people you know but don't really understand. And, the more you know them, the less you understand them sometimes. I mean, I think there has to be that gap between what you know and what you understand for there to be interesting writing. If you know something and you think you've already figured it all out, I mean, I think your writing tends to be a little flat.
So the act of writing is kind of like chronicling or documenting your process of coming to understand something.
Or even creating sort of a venue in which you can try to understand something that, of course you will never completely understand.
As opposed to saying, well, I see this and that's what's there. Some of the most interesting writing can be, I'm finding this and I'm finding my feelings about this and here's what I'm learning that I didn't know an hour ago maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
What's the best part about being a writer for you?
I don't know. I like being in the middle of something, where it's a project that I've been doing for a while, and I've sort of figured out where it's going, but not completely. So I've written something, and I think there's something in it, but I need to revise it, and I'm beginning to find out, what it's all about. I mean, that's a good part.
Kind of the act of discovery of the work you're doing.
Or even, the act of making better sentences.
Right. Yeah, I find, if someone could magically make all my story ideas become great works of completed literature, I would miss the fun of actually creating them myself. Even if I fail, some of my best memories are of stories, the act of writing stories that I later decided weren't good enough to do anything with, but actually writing them was so fun. What's your favorite of your works and why?
I don't know. I mean, that's hard to say. I think the thing that you're working on is probably always your favorite thing, or the thing you just most recently finished. So I think right now it would be my novel that just came out.
And what's that novel called?
It's called Stonefield, True Arrow, and it's a novel about a woman who lives in Milwaukee and is a weaver. But, it's very much about solitude and being an artist and a sort of pursuit of beauty.
So that's a theme.
I suppose so. Of course, I didn't know this until I, was halfway through the book.
What was your impetus to write it?
The hours I spent looking at this comet a few years ago, the Hale-Bopp.
Yeah, I saw that. It was a good one.
It was beautiful, and you could see it even if you lived in an urban area because it was so bright, and it came out at just the right time. So, I spent a lot of time looking at it, and I started thinking about, all the time you have to spend alone to look at something beautiful. And I also imagined, somebody looking at this comet and being in the middle of her life and thinking, I will never see this again.
All right. What's your favorite work by someone else, or your favorite author, or one of them?
I really don't have any one favorite author. I mean, there are people I like to read. I mean, with this too, it's just like, you're writing. The thing that you just finished reading that you liked is probably the one that's foremost in your mind. I just finished Sue Miller's novel, While I Was Gone. I mean, that was really well done. It's a first-person narrative. And it just catches these moments, psychological moments of truth about, what it's like to be married, what it's like to remember something from your past, and, that's not the life you have anymore, and now you're leading a different life, and what do you do about that? I mean, that was very well done. I mean, I really enjoyed that novel.
What would you like to read that maybe you haven't had time to yet? Something that's on your list to... Or an author, or someone you want to explore?
You know, I have like stacks of books on my shelf that I hope to read yet. So I haven't quite thought of any one thing, except that I really should get to, you know, all of that. Once in a while, you know, I go back and try to bridge the gap in my education. You know, there are these sort of masterpieces of literature that I have somehow not read. You know, I have to say I've never read through War and Peace. I mean, that would be a good thing to read, but it's easier to start with something smaller. This summer I read Madame Bovary for the first time. You know, it's a book that everyone should have read, but I just never, you know, read it. So I thought, you know, every summer I want to read something like that, some important, you know, work that I've somehow skipped over in my, you know, in my reading career. I'd like to go back and, you know, fill that gap as much as possible.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
I really enjoyed talking with you.